Hello.
Hey, internet folks and other attendees. It's good to be on this side of the panelist Zoom. I'm not gonna lie, it's great.
That's right. You're on the inside, Justin. You're on the inside.
The short Wizard of Oz, behind the screen and all that.
Exactly. And exactly right.
Right down to the shortness and all. It's good.
All right. So we got one more minute. We'll stay on schedule here. The intricacies of Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Thank everyone who's watching the stream, and all of our participants. You are in the right place. It's MSU Comics Forum 2021. You can see by our spiffy Zoom backgrounds that Justin and I are sporting.
Yeah, these are super official. I like this.
Right. Yeah. We don't want you to seem unofficial. That would be horrible. I just want to say that we've made the decision that people at MSU are going to go early in the day. And that's our gift to you in other parts of the country. So that's in parts of the world. I just want to point it out to you. We made the schedule. We punished ourselves with the early money going. So, and it's an honor to take one for the comics field as a whole. I just want to throw it out there.
We're doing you the favors, really.
That's right. Okay, it's officially 9 a.m. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the first session of the MSU Comics Forum. This is a session that is part of a tradition of scholarly engagement at MSU related to comics. Our first two sessions are really sort of part of sustained conversations about comics that are going on at MSU. This is our opportunity to give our colleagues and those of us involved in those conversations an opportunity to sort of talk about them and get feedback and share what we've been doing with our community of comic scholars, and really appreciate this unique opportunity. So as I said earlier, my name is Julian Chambliss. I'm a professor of English here at MSU. I'm also the Val Behrman Curator of History at the MSU Museum, and I'm going to give my colleague Justin an opportunity to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Justin Weigard. I'm a PhD candidate here in the Department of English at MSU. I work in comics, game studies, digital humanities, and children's literature.
So we're here to talk to you about Comics is Data North America. And I'm going to hope that I can share my screen here, because you never know.
You need me to do it?
Yeah, I need you to do it. I'll figure that out later. Yeah, can you share? Oh, it's working for you.
Correct.
All right, so Comics Data in North America. Our presentation is entitled "In Data We Trust." Our other presenter, Kate Topham, can't be here. She had a conflict, but this was a presentation that we worked on together. If you recall last year at MSU, next slide, please. Yeah, previously, right, like, and this is sort of like a television episode thing. Previously in the episode of, right, and so previously in Comics and Data North America, we introduced the project. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you may or may not know, of course, MSU Library has a very long history of data sets and collection as data activity. And that term, collection as data, is really talking about the opportunities represented by having large collections of digital data available through the library. And what are opportunities in terms of research that are afforded by creating data sets that can be used by researchers to do analysis. Last year, we're really starting before last year, in 2018, 2019, there was a group that was put together out of the library that brought together some of the people previously involved in data set activity, comic scholars, and we worked on the first stage of what would be a collection as data project focusing on the MSU library special collections comics data collection. And what this meant was that we were attempting to take the MARC record, the machine readable record related to all the material related to comics and special collection, and output them. And this output became the data set that is now available for download and can be used for research. And if you go to this URL, you can see all the data sets that are available from the library. But of course, the benefits of this, and this is the next slide. Let me go ahead to the next slide. the benefits of this is that, of course, when we have a data set like this, there's a computational use, meaning that we move the MARC record, which can come out somewhat junky, and after some cleaning and reconciling, becomes tabular data that can be used for computational use and for data scientists, of which I am not. But it's quite clear that that is important, right? Like, when you normalize this data, reconcile it, all the names are the same, you can start to do stuff with it in terms of like data visualizations and critical analysis using data tools. By creating the data set, well, of course, we lower the barriers of use. And almost immediately, as a part of our initial project in this first stage of this, there was, especially in my mind, a number of possible uses that could grow from having a data set like this based on a comics collection. A lot of it, for me, had to do with the idea of locality, uncovering relationships in terms of creative communities, creating some understanding of different subsets of information related to comics and how it's shared over time and space, so on and so forth. Basically, we have stacks on stacks of data, and at the very, 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 very least, the process of moving from machine readable data to an output form that can be cleaned and reconciled and made into a data set that can be used by researchers was a major accomplishment. And in the way of digital humanities, the nature of these things are cyclical. And if you don't actually create moments where you can say you did something, then someone will come along and say you did nothing. And so one of our benchmarks was we went from machine data, right, machine readable data that's in the library system, which cannot necessarily be used for computational use. We took it out, we cleaned it, reconciled it, made a uniform and tabular data that now can be used for computational use. And that in itself is an accomplishment because it's 50,000 lines of data. 50,000 lines of data. 50,000 lines of data. You say things 3 times when you want to emphasize something. 50,000 lines of data, right? So there was an accomplishment there. And yes, I'm being a little bit comical, but it's important to recognize that in the nature of digital humanities, these sort of benchmark transformations associated with data are really important, right? But next slide, please. When we thought about what we learned from that first stage of the project, and I do personally think about this as a stage of things, at the end of that first stage, we accomplished X, right? We accomplished that transformation that I talked about. Next slide. But one of the things that was, upon reflection, that we thought was an avenue for future development was around this question of Wikidata and Wikipedia bias. This was a really important sort of conclusion that came from both our own sort of like reflection on what we've done, but also conversations with other people in the library world and in comic studies world about the possible implications of the data as it sat, having come through that first sort of transformative place. Like we brought this data out. What patterns can we see just looking at it as it is? And so Wikidata and Wikipedia bias were some obvious elements. Let me say a word here about Wikidata versus Wikipedia. I think most people involved in digital humanities will understand the Wikipedia bias, right? The idea that Wikipedia is a database, the world's probably biggest open source database of information that's queried probably more than any other website in the world. And we are, of course, all well aware of the nature of some of the erasure that's associated with this, meaning it's created primarily by white men. It tends to omit women, people of color. There are questions around region, questions around really a scope of like ideas related to representing different experiences. And this has given rise over the last 20 years, 15 years at the very least, of well, I'm trying to get the number right, but the Wikipedia editathon, right? Consistent projects designed to provide greater coverage of those people and those ideas and those spaces that are omitted in the normative nature of the way Wikipedia has developed. So the Wikipedia editathon around X is something that most people would recognize. You've heard about it. Wikidata is a little bit different. And for us, the Wikidata element was actually one that correspond, I think, ideologically, but also in terms of like what we contribute as an organization and as an institution in terms of impact as a consistent sort of path forward. So next slide. As a part of our Graphic Possibilities Research Workshop, which is a research workshop in the English department that I'm the faculty lead and Justin is a graduate co-lead, we decided we want to try to pursue this Wikidata project. So I want to pause here to give Justin a chance to sort of like talk a little bit about Graphic Possibility Workshop and some of his activities up until sort of like in a general sense, and we'll get back to this particular project in a moment.
Yeah, so we formed the Graphic Possibilities Research Workshop. This would have been last year, along with now Dr. Zach Cruzy. And it's really a way for us to kind of bring scholars into MSU and also connect scholars at MSU around what we kind of talk about as these two interrelated branches of critical inquiry and engaged pedagogy. We're really interested in trying to explore the possibilities of comics within the classroom and also try and look at new ways of studying comics. And so some of the different events that we've had have been bringing in comic scholars and makers like Stacey Robinson and John Jennings. We had some pedagogy workshops with our keynote speakers from last year, Nick Suzanis and Kiana Whitted. And we've also been able to maintain a podcast dedicated to critical inquiry and engaged pedagogy, which you can find at our website down below. Shameless plug. But it's also really been about trying to build out and make a lot of our comics research and our comics data and resources that much more accessible. One last major outcome has been that we've put together a pretty sizable open educational resource in the form of a library guide that you can find at the MSU Library's website. I'll also have links for it somewhere throughout this slide, and I'll be, we'll be showing them on Twitter and things like that.
Thanks a lot, Justin.
Yeah.
So for Graphic Possibilities, the idea of building on the possibilities of Wikidata was an obvious forward point for in terms of programming, right? As Justin points out, one of our goals here is to really sort of build community around comics. And of course, because of our strengths as a digital humanities community, we really wanted to take advantage of that. So the Graphic Possibilities sponsored Wikidata event was an opportunity to try to do that. And this was a 2-day event that we designed and organized, reaching out to communities of practice across the country around the idea of Wikidata editing as an outcome. And really here, we're taking the data set that we've created in the first stage and looking at how that might be used to edit Wikidata. So this is an important sort of like question because now we're really getting into like, well, what's Wikidata? Well, first, who participated with us, Well, this little slide here shows you that we actually had a number of colleagues across the country who had communities of practice on their campuses that worked with us across Zoom. And we did this over 2 days to edit Wikidata. So our colleagues at these universities, and very purposefully, we reached out to universities that had comic collections because we saw them as partners who could see use case and trying to have a better sense of Wikidata. And what we did is we set up a series of work periods that allow for us to learn about Wikidata, to work very consistently using some tools to edit Wikidata, and then sort of like see our impact. And I'm gonna turn it over to Justin because I know that he had a lot to do in terms of like planning and organizing this, and as a graduate co-lead, and so I want to give him a chance to sort of like reflect a bit on this process.
What we managed to do is we sort of put out a call to on social media and everywhere else that we could, and looked for our stakeholders and partners that we thought would be really interested. But we also made a concerted effort to bring in graduate students, independent scholars, staff, and librarians. We were really interested in trying to open this up as much as possible, but we were also really interested in giving the opportunity to work on this project for people who have no Wikidata experience, which in this case was also me. It was a very odd process because I've not worked in Wikidata before, but I was really interested in learning more about the affordances of this and the connections that we could bridge. So what we did was we brought in an expert on the matter, Will Kent, who is the Wikidata program manager at Wikidata Education, who was able to talk with us for about an hour the first day. And I think he might have given us a little bit more on the second day to basically give us an intro into what is Wikidata, how we can use it to our advantage, and how our contributions matter. And so I think we actually have a recording from him. If I can share my computer sound, we're going to try and play it. Fingers crossed that this all works.
For those who are not familiar with Wikidata, it is basically the central linked data repository of all Wikimedia projects. So another way to think about that, because that's a mouthful to unpack, is it's kind of like abstract descriptions of all concepts on any language Wikipedia that exists. So how to describe the universe through linked data, pretty much, which is an ambitious project.
And we really appreciate having Will here. We really appreciated him here in our event because he was able to talk through the process of interacting with Wikidata for folks who had zero familiarity with the process. And we were able to make a lot of progress really quickly. But the other major effort that we had was from our third presenter and our third co-conspirator, Kate Topham, who provided a lot of digital guidance for this event. I think we're supposed to have a video here. There it is. Okay. Right. And she actually found this tool called Mix and Match, which is a really great entry-level tool because there's dozens and dozens of tools for working with Wikidata, and Mix and Match is a really great one for connecting data sets to Wikidata. So I'm going to try and play this one more time. How much do we want to play of this, Julian?
I have it set up to play just a little clip.
My name is Kate Topham, and I am the Digital Humanities Archivist at Michigan State University. In this video, I'm going to walk you through Mix and Match, which is a Wikidata tool we'll be using as part of the 2020 Graphic Possibilities Wikidata Hackathon. This video is aimed towards people who have a basic understanding of Wikidata items, statements, and references, but not with Mix and Match itself. Mix and Match was created by user Magnus Manska to make the process of adding information to Wikidata easier. Mix and Match takes a data set like a library catalog, taxonomy, or database, and attempts to match every entry contained in that data set to items in Wikidata, Wikipedia, and other Wikimedia projects. You can access Mix and Match for yourself at the URL at the bottom of my slide here. Mix and Match contains over 2,500 catalogs from dozens of different topics and interest areas, from podcasts to philately, from...
Okay, apparently it paused.
Yeah, that's when it's set to stop. So
Perfect.
Kate couldn't join us today, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to see the sort of foundational work that she provided for the Wikidata Editathon. Her discovery of Mix and Match allowed us to organize at some level the Wikidata Editathon, because what we did was connect our data set that we created in phase one, put it into Mix and Match, and that would allow us to organize the groups that were working across the country on the Wikidata that we had designated. So we go to the next slide, you'll see that our goals for, that always happens. Our goals for the Wikidata Editathon we're really to concentrate on what, I personally think is a really exciting period in terms of comic study, and that is the golden age, right? We know as from a sort of qualitative perspective, there are lots of questions and discussions that we can have about the scope of comics produced in the 1930s and 1940s and early 1950s. And because the MSU Comics collection is so large, we have objects in our collections that are not reflected in the digital record. And we have objects in our collection that can better define what is in the digital record, right? Because we actually have the physical thing. We can look at it and go, oh yeah, no, this thing's not exactly right. Or we have the physical thing and go, this isn't in there, right? So then it's super helpful to have the archive, right? We all know that as researchers, but from a data perspective, it becomes incredibly important. So our goal for the Wikidata event was to focus on the golden age. And in particular, we wanted to think about authors and publishers and think about the possibility of, as I say, identifying those things that were omitted and adding them using the Mix and Match tool, or looking at things that are in Wikidata but misidentified and using the fact that we have the actual object to clarify what they are in the linked data. And so we were incredibly successful in that. We actually got through the golden age and had to go into the silver age, right? But our groups across the country were incredibly efficient in terms of like going through this. And it was really amazing to see the effectiveness of the Mix and Match tool, because not only did it allow us to sort of like bring everyone into a single group working on a single set of data, but also allowed us to track the progress that people were doing related to this. Justin, you want to say a couple of things about this?
Yeah, so one of the things that I didn't understand about using Mix and Match before was how it was going to allow all 50 plus people participating in this event to all be working within the same data set without basically tripping over each other and messing up data records, essentially. Like if you've ever even just worked in Google Docs or had a shared spreadsheet and you can see other people working in it at the same time, like it sounded like chaos to me. But Mix and Match is really great because it essentially, when you log into your dashboard, it gives you one record pulled randomly from that data set. And all you have to do is either say, yep, this exists in Wikidata, and then you edit it and contribute to that entry, or no, this doesn't exist, and you create a new one, and then it spits out another entry for you, almost like an assembly line of including and updating Wikidata. So Kate had put together and pulled, basically cleaned up as best as she could, from the already clean data set. She'd pulled the golden age data set and put it into our Mix and Match queue, essentially. And our participants burned through that. She thought that was going to take us through 2 days, and we burned through it in the first session, essentially. So she basically spent the rest of that first session uploading the next set from the Silver Age. So our participants blew us away, essentially. And so what this looks like on the back end is that we can actually see how many entries were fully matched, is kind of how Mix and Match lists everything, fully matched with entries that were already existed or were created. and which ones were not matched. So for the Golden Age authors here, you'll see that we had 230 entries that were fully matched, which is an 85% success rate. We ended up having about 37 that were unmatched, so they either didn't fit, they weren't applicable, or they just kind of fell through the cracks. We found a couple of finicky things about working with mix and match, which is that when you do have 50 people working in the same data set, occasionally there are glitches. So that's kind of where some of that comes from. Same thing for the publishers. We actually made a massive amount of progress on the publishers, which we were all really excited about because these were primarily Golden Age comics publishers or, comic art publishers. Again, we had about a 92.5% success rate of fully matching these. So these are now uploaded into and represented in Wikidata. Again, these were either entries that didn't exist before or were updated with records from the MSU Comic Arts Collection. When we get to the Silver Age, you can kind of start seeing, again, about a similar success rate. We were really, the authors data set was much smaller, is 359 entries or so. We got through about 88.5% of those. This is where the numbers kind of just worked against us with time. We worked through about half of the comics publishers' records from the MSU Comics Collection. And I say about half, I say that as if like we failed in some way. We made it through 1,200 entries and fully matched 1,200 entries, which is as much as the other three data sets that I just talked about combined. It also just kind of shows that we were able to accomplish this over 2 days with 50-ish participants popping in and out and working somewhat asynchronously. One of the great advantages of the digital space is that we were able to connect everyone through a digital platform called Discord. It's got voice, it's got text, it's got chat rooms. And so when people were able to join us, they hopped into the Discord and we kind of worked through this stuff. So we had a massive success is really the short of it. But we also have a lot of work to be left to do, which is also really exciting. Guess we have Will's face again. Oh, is this a second one?
This is the second one. So, of course, whenever we're thinking about digital humanities, things as both Justin and I are in the digital humanities spaces, we know one of the challenges when we're thinking about this is the so what question. Digital humanities projects often are challenged on their validity vis-a-vis a qualitative analysis, right? My prime example, I talk to students about this, someone spends hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars on a digital humanities project, and you find out, the South lost the Civil War or something like that. That's a horrible example, but it's the kind of critique that's often leveled against digital humanities, that the nature of the work is using a digital methodology to arrive at a conclusion that can be arrived through a qualitative approach. But one of the things that we're thinking about in terms of this project is the structural implications of having more data. And this is a really important point that is connected explicitly to Wikidata. And this is the sort of so what question that when we posed it to Will Kitt, he had an answer, like why is working with Wikidata so important. And this is, again, an excerpt from an interview that we did with him. So,
one, existing. If it doesn't exist there, then that doesn't help a lot of people. So there's a big representation aspect to this. And two, that it has to be trustworthy and accurate, which is kind of a major tenet of Wikipedia, something that it's overcome in the last 20 years since it was started. It's become a lot more reliable, and a lot of people, it's their first place they visit to learn about information, and often kind of transcends these conversations about bias, fake facts online, which is kind of refreshing these days.
So Will's argument for the positive aspect of why Wikidata is important is like its existence, right? Once something is in Wikidata, it becomes part of a linked data ecosystem that is queried by databases across the world and in multiple languages. So once we define something in Wikidata as a something, then multiple people, regardless of what they may or may not be doing, they might not necessarily be working on comics, they might be working on something else, will also get that knowledge, right? And the fact that we have The actual object, right, becomes a question of like its validity, its accuracy. We have the object, and so therefore our entry in Wikidata, we can say with some confidence, is accurate. And so this really opens up a door to thinking about the possibility of creating a much more uh, nuanced and richer narrative of comics history and therefore cultural history connected to the objects that we have in the collection. And so basically we're going back to that original, what did we learn in the first stage of the project, this question of bias, and we're offering a pathway to have a more accurate reading of the past by cataloging the objects in a digital form. And ultimately, this means that our goals of the Wikidata project extend the original goals of the project of working with the collections and thinking about them as data. And also it opens up the door to myriad new use cases that we can't even predict. And having the opportunity to familiarize our community with Wikidata. Wikidata itself offers numerous data visualization tools that were new to me. Like Justin, I was not familiar with Wikidata, and to have an opportunity to talk with Will Kent and to work with something like Mix and Match opened the door to thinking about the possible pathways to developing more stuff. So, the positives here are really, really clear. Our final results are actually, I'm not sure they're actually quite final, because I think Mix and Match, when it spits stuff out, it does it in phases. But we can say that these numbers are an indication of the impact that we had, right? So I'm going to let Justin talk a little bit about this.
Yeah. By the end of the day, I know that this was the snapshot that we took at the end of day 2, which is that we had edited 5,000 items, and that also doesn't even account for the creation of new ones or adding references, which is kind of just adding more clarification and more query references essentially to each of these things. So I know Kate circled back a little bit later, and once kind of Mix and Match caught up to all 55 of us, we actually had over 7,700 items that were edited or created in Wikidata throughout like a 2-day period by 55 collaborators across the, like very, very much across the US, in Canada, and we actually had a participant join us from the UK. So it was really, really incredible. It also, one of the things that we really, that kind of stood out to us was that our comics Wikidata became this really important nexus of community, particularly in a time when we are so separated and separated by gaps in many different ways. And we were all able to come together around Wikidata and around our interest in comics or our interest in Wikidata. And that actually ended up becoming a really important reciprocal knowledge generating and knowledge confirmation process, wherein we would be looking through these different comics entries, and we would come across an entry that would be really confusing or that might pop up in 3 different spaces. Comics authors is a really good example, where there would be a somewhat generic name, and then there would be 3 different references that would pop up in Mix and Match. And one of them would be, let's say Matt Smith, writer, Matt Smith, performer, Matt Smith, movie star. And we kind of would have to go through and do the math and say, okay, well, we know that, whatever author we were working with, we know that they did a lot of things. Did they actually do X and Y? So there was a lot of crowdsourcing back and forth, but also a lot of tracing of comics publishers. And, like comics publishers during those times changed names and changed hands at different points. And so we were able to kind of crowdsource those things. But we also learned a lot too about, again, some of those comics publishers, particularly some of the regional comics publishers that we were working with, which was really, really important. So, yeah, and also in addition, this is all in addition to a lot of the cultural and historical outcomes that Julian was highlighting just before. So this leads us to the possibilities part of graphic possibilities, and also what we're sort of looking ahead to and really excited about in working with Wikidata. In just about 2 months, we're going to actually be hosting the second iteration of our Comics is Wikidata event, where what we are colloquially referring to as the Comics is Data Silver Age event. It's going to be a shorter event, not necessarily 2 days long, just like 2, maybe 4 hours at most, just kind of one longer sort of sprint. And our goal is to really try and connect a lot of the stuff that we did in the October event, our Golden Age event, to entries that were there and also entries that are already extant in Wikidata. I have a link here. If you go to our website, graphicpossibilities.hcommons.org/Wikipedia, or just drop me an email, you'll be able to sign up for notifications to join us, or just to stay in the loop, even if you just kind of want to know a little bit about it. But we're really excited about this. We are planning to have Will Kent join us again to kind of help us work through more efficient ways to make those connections and kind of think through the implications of what we're doing with Wikidata. So our first event was basically about creating these entries and editing them. Second goal is making connections. Lastly, we're really excited about finding these new case studies to working with our comics Wikidata, and also to make connections between other instances of comics Wikidata. So one thing that we're hoping to do is to start modeling and soliciting think pieces, utilizing our comics Wikidata, data visualizations of comics publishers and creators during that time, or shorter think pieces like are present on the Circulating American Magazines forum, which has a sort of this really great forum of data visualizations plus a short little analytical piece explaining and kind of working through those. We're also really interested in hosting lesson plans and visualizations on our open educational resource, so that people can have kind of pre-packaged or lesson plan templates to start working with Wikidata in different ways. And then we are also hoping to partner and work with partner up with our partners and other folks to work on other Wikidata events and host other Wikidata events related to comics. Did I cover everything, Julian?
Yes, that's perfect. I was over there looking at the chat, see if there were any questions. But yeah, for us, of course, as we continue to try to live up to and extend the original goals of the Comics is Data, Collection is Data, Comics is Data project, we continue to work with our partners in the library, like Kate, and we continue to sort of think about this as part of a broader set of discussions that intersect with our digital humanities community and cultural studies more broadly. And so we see Wikidata as an opportunity to both facilitate greater understanding of the collection as a living body of knowledge creation in a different way, perhaps than we might usually think about it, but also want to think about the opportunity to continue to develop the relationships that we did develop for this project, right? We were able to connect with a community of practice at institutions across the country and with individuals and researchers around the world. And that was really an exciting opportunity for us. And to have 50 plus participants over this 2 days, I thought personally, I still think was a tremendous success, especially given the sort of dynamic nature of the Zoom environment. And to have such an impact in such a short period of time, I also, personally quite impressed by, and perhaps I'm being overly optimistic, but I hope that we can have a continued level of success. Our goals here are a consistent engagement, at least for the next couple of years, next 3 years, around this Wikidata project as the next stage of Commons is Data North America. So, we're going to try to be consistent and have the opportunity, because of the graphic possibility workshop structure in the English department, to have some home base related to these activities. So if you're interested, please join us.
Yeah. On that note too, one of the things that I was really excited about and impressed by when we hosted these events was that we also gave a little bit of room to our partners to talk about their comics collections and their comics initiatives. And so we really, in kind of using this Wikidata as our nexus of community, we were also able to really learn from our partners at UNT and Illinois and Ohio and Florida. And I know I'm forgetting folks, I'm so sorry, but there were also 50 of us all working together. But we're also able to learn a lot about the initiatives that everyone else was doing. And so we're really excited about new ways to move forward. So yeah, if you want to partner with us, if you want to be involved, please get a hold of us. We are very easy to get a hold of. You'll be seeing our faces all throughout the comics forum, but also find us on Twitter. You can drop us emails. You can go to our website where we also have our podcast and yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we recognize that this roundtable format is a little bit different from what we talked about, but as I said to Justin, we got this time, and we're sort of like reporting to people about what happened. So this is one of those ongoing conversations in the context of our MSU community. So I'm monitoring the chat here, make sure that see if I see any questions. A lot of love for Kate, and yes, Kate is a superstar, John Martin. And I really can't say enough about Kate's support, the technical support. She connected us actually with a community of practice out at Stanford University. That's how we learned about the Wikidata. They have a Wikidata group there. We talk with them as part of our planning process. Their familiarity really got us on the course to find the tools that we needed to do what we eventually did, right? To find a mix and match, understanding what we could do. They also, connected us with pointing us in the direction of the Wiki Education Foundation, which got us connected to Will Kent. And again, Will got up early. He's on the West Coast. He got up early twice and gave us really insightful presentations about Wikidata. I want to stress that I had no knowledge of Wikidata prior to this event. I mean, I knew it existed, but the full impact of what it meant to work with it was something I was learning along the way. This was an opportunity, which we talked about. This was an opportunity to make our community more aware of Wikidata, and we took that that learning opportunity very seriously. And I think we all came away with a better understanding of Wikidata at the end of this process. And I think that there's a real opportunity for us to grow that understanding moving forward. So perhaps long-term benefits for all of us for this.
Yeah, and I will say too, we also had some really great conversations leading up to, and actually directly after the event over email with a lot of our collaborators and people who were interested. One of the questions that emerged was how this event and our Wikidata stuff would work with extant and really important comics databases like the Grand Comics database and these other really important major resources. And a big part of it is kind of what we've highlighted as far as linking data to larger databases essentially, and making a lot of our data from the MSU Comic Arts collection open and accessible. A big part of why we were excited about this was just to try and bring people into being able to utilize the Comic Arts collection from a distance in a new and kind of different and exciting way. We also got a couple of questions about hosting events like these with classes and using these kind of Wikidata events as classroom activities, which I think is a really exciting extension of comics pedagogy. Mix and Match is a really easy to use tool, and it's really easy to teach tool, I would say. Again, as somebody who wasn't familiar with Wikidata before we started this, and because of the way that it functions, you are able to have several dozen people all working in the same data set. And so it becomes this really great entry level digital humanities and comics intersection pedagogical activity. So we'd be really interested in trying to partner with folks to host something like that as well.
We did get a question about, was it difficult to manage contributors from the stream chat? And the answer to that is that was the brilliance of the Mix and Match tool. What Mix and Match allowed us to do was to allow people to register to be a part of the group that was working on the data set that we uploaded. So one question people had early on is like, well, how do we know what? And we eliminated that by saying, this is the list of authors, this is the list of publishers, register using mix and match, so that when you are working with the data set, with the set, we will know what you did, right? So people weren't working randomly. They were working on this thing that we created, and they were registered and mix and match to provide all of us a sense of like, this is where we are in this process. So every person was registered in the group, and as a member of the group, we could see their progress. So when they finished something, they were assigned something that was already a part of the group, a part of the list of objects that someone else wasn't using, right? So we always knew where we were. That's why we were able to move through things so quickly, because there was no doubling of activity. Like someone was assigned an object or author or a publisher, they were working on that. If they matched it to something in Wikidata, it was matched. If they created a new entry, they created a new entry. And then everyone else was working on something that hadn't been processed, right? So that was a huge part of like the mix and match tool. It answered all those questions around organization, but it did require registration. And so we had to create a group in mix and match, and it gave people that structure that was necessary, right? And we got another question as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, Zach Cruzy in the chat asks, thinking about how the data set might be applied, what were some of the most surprising things you learned in parsing the information? And we had more than a few smaller, data pieces that I think we were kind of surprised were uploaded or edited in such and such of a way. But really one of the larger stakes of it was that we were really struck by how Wikidata can provide a space for discussion of the authority of these records. Going back to that example that I kind of misattributed before, we ran into one instance of Bill Hinnant, the cartoonist, versus Bill Hinnant, the actor. And when we were kind of uploading entries, we realized that some of the entries previously, before we'd gotten there, had been misattributed to Bill Hinnant, the actor. And so by drawing on the vast knowledge of our community, we were able to kind of identify these errors and fix them in both locations. So it wasn't just that we were fixing errors or misattributions in Wikidata, but we were also able to kind of update entries in our own data set. And so one of the most surprising things, to kind of tie it all back together, was just how much authority users in working in Wikidata can have, and also how important like communal knowledge can be in that practice as well. So, I'm trying to think.
I think that was one of the things that was really interesting. We did do a lot of research on the fly. Like, wait, what is it? like asking around, trying to figure out what does this mean? What's the implication of this? It's also important to recognize that as a lot of open source things, we started out, I think, the process really afraid that we're going to mess something up. And then later on, we got a lot more comfortable because the system allows for people to sort of get in there. You're not the last person who's going to look at these things, but I think we got a greater comfort level. I noticed that on the first day, we started out afraid and petrified that we were going to mess something up. And by the end of the day, I think people were burning through things like a machine, which is part of the reason we got through this huge number of things on the first day. The comfort level clearly just skyrocketed, which I was really impressive to me.
I was kind of scrolling back through Discord, and I can't recommend our Discord enough for being a really great space for people to talk through and kind of crowdsource and kind of bang our heads together about these things. But I also remember that we did run into a few like technical glitches where people were trying to mix and match in a specific mode. There's different modes and visuals of Wikidata. You can either edit things in a match mode or in a list mode. And so some of the time we were trying to figure out, like, one person would have a weird random glitch. And so we would kind of end up spending some time trying to troubleshoot whether that was something on their end, something on Wikidata's end, or something involved with the data set. So it did require probably the three of us, Julian, myself, and Kate, most of the time we kind of spent making sure that everyone was good to go, essentially. And I really can't stress how much troubleshooting, heavy lifting Kate did. It really helps to have somebody who's even just moderately familiar with Wikidata and that tool set, because she was able to identify what issues might be or identify workarounds, which was really, really helpful. So.
Right. Yeah. You do need some technical person. I mean, I have always hesitate to say technical, never let tech stop you, right? Like never let tech stop you. But in the case of Wikidata, the combination of Will Kent sort of like leading us through, plus Kate having some familiarity as a sort of data person in the library, when some questions came up, even though she wasn't necessarily like the be all end all expert on Wikidata, she get into it like, this will be okay, right? And again, remember we're going from my own personal familiarity with Wikidata, which was like next to nothing, to watching the video, playing around with the thing, going like, oh, okay, this means this and this means that, right? It does take time, but it wasn't so insurmountable that it was impossible for us to sort of move forward, which ultimately mean the difference between success and failure. Okay, I want to make sure I'm not missing any questions down here.
Another thing that we sort of learned throughout the process was we kind of learned how to leverage our community's different areas of expertise and our community's different familiarities with comics and with just archival records in general. It was really, really fabulous having so many librarian folks and also some folks who had worked in Wikidata in different ways, because we were able to, again, kind of all gain a little bit of a deeper understanding with how like MARC records are connected to Wikidata records and things like that. But we also got to see some of the institutional behind the scenes of, how the UNT library, might have recorded X or Y, or how the USC librarians are currently working with their comics collection, and kind of how, and again, we kind of talked through some different potential projects that this could be applied to. I also think that I was trying to skim through the chat. I know that we found at least like we kind of got stuck on one publisher because we were trying to figure out whether it was like publisher A versus publisher B, who had also kind of been involved with publisher A, and kind of it got messy. And so we had a really rigorous discussion about, the publishing industry during the time too. So even that in and of itself was a really, it was fun. I'm not gonna lie, it was just kind of a fun outcome.
All right, I don't see any new questions in the chat on YouTube or in our webinar circle here. Again, I really appreciate everyone for coming out. Look for more information on our short sprint, as Justin rightly points out, for Wikidata in the spring. This will be April. We're just really thinking about the possibilities of following up on the stuff we did in the fall. And that really is the pattern that we're looking for to try to do for the next in this 3-year cycle, right? So we get through year one and do the same thing, like move forward chronologically using our data set as a route, and do the same thing in the fall, and then follow up with a more in-depth, shorter sprint in the spring. And if we're able to do that in a way that's meaningful, we are relatively sure we will have made a dent, a significant dent in the validity of information in Wikidata. And I think that that would be an incredibly meaningful accomplishment. Knock on wood, make that happen. But please, if you want to participate in that, especially if you have a community of practice, one of the things about this that was something that was a really unexpected, but I think important sort of like modification that emerged organically is that we went in this thinking about lone individuals joining us from different places. But what happened was that what we saw and what, ultimately I think it dawned on us made more sense is that the people at these different institutions would get people together there and they would all join as a group, right? So they wouldn't be doing it alone. We did have lone participants. There's no question about that. We did have, when you say lone participants, sounds like lone gunmen, but we did have people who were not working in a group. But it also was very significant that we had a number of people who were working with friends and colleagues, sometimes smaller groups of people, but sometimes what I thought of as bigger groups of people. And indeed, we did consider the use of classes. Now that we've done it, I think we probably would actually say that, yeah, it is okay for a class to be involved in this process, because we were using the mix and match tool for the first time, the registration and everything. But it definitely is something that an undergrad class could participate in. So when this process is over, the official Wikidata editathon process is over, you still have that community of people who have gone through a process of learning about Wikidata. So if you want to continue engagement with Wikidata with collections on your site or thinking about other collections that might be worthwhile in terms of exploring, enhancing in terms of Wikidata, this process would be a great stepping stone, right? We've sort of eliminated some of the questions about Wikidata. We've created a space, we work to create a space to educate people about Wikidata. And that is also one of the goals for us, to make sure that at the end of the process, people have a better understanding about Wikidata and how it works. And we think that is exactly something that's happened.
Yeah, I really can't thank our partners enough, mostly for getting the word out and also for bringing so many people in. Again, our partners at University of North Texas, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, University of Florida, University of South Carolina, and The Ohio State University. I know that we had small contingents of folks from each of those institutions, and also who were able to spread out and share out that stuff as well, which is really great. One of the back end things that we did was we wanted to make sure that people could communicate with each other and kind of get to know, again, build their own community out as well. So we made small little Discord groups geared around, themed around just silly comics names, but it really worked because we had, smaller groups of 5 or 6 people that could, again, bounce ideas off of each other. So if they didn't have to, potentially hop into our huge 55-person chat in the main lobby space of Discord. But I really want to thank our partners, and we're excited about everything here. So.
Yeah, this has been a great project. And of course, again, our goals here are to try to extend at least some of the narratives that have grown from the Collections Data Project from the very beginning. And as we go through this process, we haven't abandoned some of the other questions about visualization of the actual data set. And there's still work to be done there. But that work probably is going to really sort of emerge, I think, naturally from some of the work that I'm putting into creating smaller subsets that are regionally specific that might be made available to people. And that's a conversation for a different day, but that is actually something I've been working on as well. State level data to make it less daunting for people, which I think actually is a great way to think about it. But again, as a project, this would like to think this is in the sweet spot amongst communities of practice here at MSU, because our emphasis on comics, because our emphasis on digital humanities, collections of data, North America, I think has an opportunity to facilitate some cross campus communication. So stay tuned and stay aware and participate as you can and when you will. I really appreciate all the work that people have done so far, and look for our invitations and look for our announcements for future developments.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Okay, so that is the end of the first roundtable. Thank you, Justin, for getting up early. Thank all of you for your questions in the chat. And thank you so much to those folks on YouTube who are looking and asking questions. We are going to take a break now, and then we'll be back with another sort of MSU-based conversations from the Graphic Narratives Network. But again, thanks so much, and we'll be right back in about 15 minutes.